So, Johnny, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you. Great to meet you, Jeff. Great to be on the show.
So, based on the intro I gave, it's quite a mouthful. You're the director of revenue generation and business development. Can you go a little bit into what that exactly means?
Absolutely. So you're right. It is a bit of a mouthful in terms of a title, and the role is pretty meaty. It's a pretty chunky role. So I started off in revenue operations. It's my passion area. It's an area which I love, focusing on systems, data, and processes. But I was an SDR before. I was an enterprise AE before. I was a sales director before. So I've got experience in those areas. I chose to leave just because I wanted to focus on the systems, data, and processes. Um, and coming into Comply Advantage, the focus was really building the revenue operations team from scratch. And I think like the way my journey to being also BDR or SDR team leader, I think is really grounded in how I view RevOps and where it can be applied. So, as a brief primer, Jeff, from a SaaS perspective, I see RevOps as you got your target, right? You have various levers which affect that target: revenue generation, revenue protection, revenue growth. You have the commercial function and the different departments which affect those levers. Within each of those departments, you have systems, data, and processes. And RevOps is there to harmonize and optimize those systems, data, and processes so that the teams can more effectively reach that goal. But that's a pretty large remit, right? So revenue operations needs to be applied to one area of that life cycle or the other. And coming on to Comply Advantage, we realize that the focus should be top of funnel, right? So accounts, contacts, quantity, quality, so the oil, and then also the engine, but just focusing primarily on the prospecting engine. So my revenue operations hat, I was already focused on how do we optimize and understand how we prospect to our customer base. How do we look at our ideal customer profile and the leads and contacts which fulfill that? And so when there was an opening, it became a very smooth transition to say, well, look, you're already looking at this strategically. Can you take on also some functional leadership as well?
I'm sure the answer was absolutely. I have no idea what I'm doing, but sure, let's do
Yeah,
this.
yeah. You know it. It's like it's always how it is, right? You growth and comfort, they don't coexist, right? You gotta get out of your comfort zone in order to really begin to grow. So whenever challenges and opportunities come like that, I see it exactly like that. It's an opportunity to grow.
Yeah, so some of my best hires have come from the sales development ranks. I've always loved to create an additional pathway for BDRs or SDRs, especially those who are thinking very process oriented. If I see that you're drawing out a funnel and you're pulling out Google Sheets or Excel and you're basically planning out your funnel with a little bit of Moneyball, I know that you've probably got the chops or at least the attitude to go into revenue operations. I almost consider it like taking the RevOps pill. It's like once you cross over and you see all the systems, you're like, wait a second, it's not just Salesforce, it's not just my sales engagement platform. There's all these other systems, and then their eyes widen up, and I'm like, I think I've got you. I think I've got you at least to enjoy the business system side of revenue operations.
100%, right? And I've been amazed at how stretching the canvas from prospecting at the coalface all the way through to the numbers that we start to report on at a sales leadership level, at an exec level, it helps each other, right? You start to understand what content, messaging, sequencing, engagement has activated that number, right? And then vice versa. And so you're right, and I think that comes down to a people level, right? A team level, where you start to see the skill sets come from both directions. I crossed over from sales to RevOps, and I think it's a great pathway.
So, with that said, here at the RevOps review, we fundamentally believe that RevOps should lead and guide the end-to-end, the funnel, or the go-to-market motion. Here, you're actually playing a frontline sales leadership role in business development. Can you tell me a little bit how you balance your time between the two positions?
Yeah, great question. So I'm not gonna deny it is a challenge, right? And I was fortunate enough when it wasn't I took on two roles at the same time at the very beginning. Right, so I was able to come in to Comply Advantage, first revenue ops leader in seat, build out the team and structure for approximately 2.5 years before then taking over on the SDR side and the SDR leader side. And so the team, the revenue operations team, was already working in a really nice way, really smooth motion. Now that meant my functional overhead for the team and the revenue operations team was much lower. I still had the strategic lean in, but like the actual functional bit was lower, and that meant that I could kind of start to turn my attention over to the SDR team and say, okay, right, I'm now going to lean in for what's probably going to be at least like 8 months, rebuild, look at the structure, build in some of the right processes, expectations, behavior, and then now things are starting to purr and move along a lot more smoothly. So, in short, it's I was fortunate that I could spend more time on the SDR side versus the RevOps side. But if I was to like split out like day to day, week to week, the kind of percentages, it's there's an overlapping project that we have, which is we sort of build out a capability right around our prospecting motion, and our north star is to increase the number of outbound meetings, and that is a shared responsibility between RevOps and and the SDR team, and so the lion's share of my time, 60%, is really delving into that, working one on one with the teams, coordinating with marketing, working with RevOps from the data perspective. And then the other 40% is kind of split between those regular reviews, the one to ones, listening and coaching, and then also leaning in on the RevOps side.
So once upon a time, I also led a sales development function. I think it's while doing revenue operations, and mostly it was a function of a lack of headcount, a lack of resources, and the fact that I had done, sales in the past, and so the natural leaning is, hey, you're in the revenue operations or sales operations position. Um, Actually, it was sales operations. It was a revenue operations role, and you had actually done sales before. I think you'd be good at taking over the SDR function. And I can tell you, it was a constant challenge to get that balance right. I was never sure I was committing enough time to either function. And over time, my personal decision was that what was best for the business was to bring in a dedicated sales development leader who could focus on the right behaviors, the career pathing, the development of the team, and the culture, and that was absolutely the right move. But I had actually watched over that team for at least 2 or 3 quarters, and I just have a profound appreciation for anyone trying to do it.
Yeah, yeah,
Now,
I completely agree, Jeff. I think like it's so tricky to balance. And I guess I've also seen like in the marketplace that this is becoming a little bit more common, at least in the last 6 months. But I want to get your take on this. So I was reading a post on LinkedIn around how RevOps is now expected to start to take on some of those responsibilities. I think the environment that you discussed, where you became and when you were managing those two roles, pretty similar environment now, right? In terms of economic environment is challenging. People are looking at making being as efficient around cost and resources as possible. Do you think that this is going to be more common, or is there other departments that can also fuse with RevOps?
I don't think it's going to be more common personally. I think the sales development function, the verdict has been that it's a feeder for the sales team for the most part. For many organizations, at least from what I've seen and what I've discussed with folks, almost the overwhelming majority of folks that I connect with view the sales development function as a feeder into the sales org. And why not, right? Like the OTE of an SDR is lower than a sales than an account executive. Also, the pathways from where you can hire these individuals increases your pipeline of candidates, is a great place to source from. Also, the commitment of the ramp of an SDR is fairly short, 60 to 90 days. And so if you need to cut ties with anyone, you can do so really quickly as opposed to with a sales rep. And so, I just think it's a great opportunity to build like the kind of a feeding or minor league system
Mm,
to the account executives. Also, it also allows you to create more meetings at a fairly decent cost envelope, right? So if you can get to what I call to power or high persona compliance, and these are the things that you teach your sales development reps. There's, there's not a lot of business acumen coming out the gate sometimes, and so you're teaching them like a mini business school. Like, here's an
mm,
industry that you've probably never heard of. Here's our talk track. Here's our value proposition. Here are the pain points that they're going through, and here are the job titles that you're going to call. Then you get out there and you start rolling the ball out on the field, and everyone just starts phone calling. And it could be anywhere between 30 to 100 calls per day, and it really depends on your motion and how much research is involved or the segments you're selling into.
mm.
But what I find is that these new SDRs, they may or may not know what job titles to call into.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, this is it's fascinating to get your perspective on this, Jeff. And yeah, you're right. You're right. Like, I think like it will. It's not common for this to be happening, but I think it will happen sporadically in certain situations where the environment actually is there for it to actually happen. But you're right. There's a set of approaches and ways that you need to build out the SDR team, and I love what you shared there.
Yeah, I think you're in a perfect position, right? Like, you were in the role yourself, so you're a
Mm.
bit of a unicorn hire, a person who can, express a little bit of duality with those two skill sets. If there are more sales development reps moving into revenue operations, which I just said earlier that I love hiring from those ranks, then absolutely, I could see at least the revenue operations team handling sales development, at least for a temporary time frame. But it's because of the unique position or situation that they're in. Do you want to talk about your operations a little bit?
Sure.
Most folks think about functional operations like sales operations, but no one ever really talks about sales development operations. And you've been on the other side of the fence, and maybe you got a lot of love from your operations team or not. I'm curious, what that looks like from the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really I think like a fascinating area and also just like part of the stack, right? In terms of understanding accounts, contacts, and how those start to feed into personas, your target market, your go-to-market approach. So when we looked at this, we first of all had to establish or understand what I call like some truths. And one of those is the minute a data point is in your CRM, it's potentially out of date, right? So there's premises, there's ideas like that where we're like, okay, so we're going to be in this constant enrichment mode. We also looked at our sort of the architecture and how we were using our tools and systems, and we're like, okay, everyone's got licenses to kind of go and mine and find this information, but what happens when you double, triple your sales team? When you have to go to markets for multiple regions and new product launches, how do you start to deal with scale? And so we spent some time just really thinking about the whole lead generation area, how SDRs work, the handover between marketing, how sequences start to break down. And I think one of the most exciting areas for us has been our automation journey in that area. So we broke down our the core workflows that an SDR, AE, anyone is really doing as they're trying to find new companies and people to communicate and contact with. Account sourcing, so finding new companies, account enrichment, right? New LinkedIn, new country information, contact sourcing, new people, contact enrichment, emails, phone numbers, etc. We broke those out and we realized that actually, if we start to look at an API model with the data sources that we connect to, and we can build in this automation layer, suddenly revenue operations can really be a partner to the SDR team and the AE team with bulk requests. And so, Jeff, this was an area that we really dug into, and it took us around 12 to 18 months to get right. Per region, you have different nuances, how we actually want to have the data sources connect, understanding the feedback loop of bad data, and so on. Again, another principle is if you can actually get a human being to actually verify whether that data is correct or not, that's the optimal versus a machine, doing its sort of automated checks. So we had to look at all of these different loops, and we built this automation play. And the result is being able to, in bulk, find different companies and target contacts that we want to approach for our go-to-market, and having those brought into Salesforce, brought into our CRM, shared with the team so they can actually move it at pace.
Now that's brilliant. I think the devil's in the details, obviously, right? So, an inbound lead comes off your form. It's enriched pre CRM insertion or post CRM insertion. Then you have your sales rep notified, alerted, taking action, verifying the information. I've seen even some teams add in machine learning steps,
Oh,
really
nice.
verifying, yeah, really looking at the data and mining it and seeing which sales reps are following with the right behaviors.
That's
Um, yeah,
awesome.
I've actually started to dabble myself with these large language models, these open APIs, and starting to query into the database, um, pull in the information. The problem with those models, obviously, is you don't know if they're true because they're not necessarily discrete models. But I think that's brilliant. You talked about automation journey across your workflows. I normally think about your pre-call activities, so your research, your prep, your practice, then your in-call steps and your post-call. I'm curious, like in those three, where do you focus your workflows first, and what was your order of priority between them?
Really good question. So for us, like the order of priority, at least at the start, was is actually in that preparation stage. In that, I kind of term it like making sure we refine the oil so that as it goes into the engine, it's as clean as possible, it's as accurate as possible. So our initial focus was on that and the scaling journey, which I've kind of just touched on, right? Which was, hey, look, can we have a level of accuracy? Our objective, Jeff, was actually, can we increase quantity and quality at the same time? Can you do this? Can you bring in bulk? Can it be accurate as you do that? So that was really the focus. And then the individual SDR leaders would then be coordinating with marketing and building out different sequences in our sales engagement platform, and then really reviewing the open rates, reply rates, relative reply rates, trying to understand, okay, like how impactful is the messaging, is the openers, and then we'd have that handoff, and all the routing that goes along with it, and the conversion rates and drop off rates. That's when then RevOps would take the lead again. And what I found though is I'm now going into that middle step a lot more, just as being that SDR leader, especially within the EMEA region. And it's fascinating to see how that starts to work. We're trying to get into the science of prospecting and breaking it down in those three areas that you described.
Yeah, I love that. And then so you talk about sequences. I love breaking down sequence math. I'm curious about your thoughts around open rates versus reply rates. Useful or not as useful?
I think they are useful, right? And I also like when they're combined. And this is not this is I can't recall now the name of the gentleman who worked there. I think he was a former no Catalyst. He used to work at Catalyst. He works at Catalyst. He used to work at Outreach, and he came up with this concept of the relative reply rate, where you can look at your open rate and you look at your reply rate as a ratio of that, and then based on different benchmarks and looking at the numbers on each side, you can understand whether it's your opener that's performing or whether it's your if the body of your content. So I think separately they have like value. Combined, I think they have even more value. And I do think like metrics are pieces that they tell different stories. You got to look at them in conjunction with others, right?
Yeah, I love that. I think you're talking about Mark Cosaglow. He's the chief
Yes,
revenue
that's the one.
officer at Catalyst. He was an advisor to my head of sales at my previous startup.
Oh, nice.
Really, really
Love the
excellent,
content.
nice gentleman. Um, Last question for you. Before we go into the last segment, Your philosophy around sequence building. I always think about outbound 30 days, maybe 14 to 15 steps, inbound 7 days, six steps. Curious about your philosophy around those two.
Fantastic. So we're very similar to that, right? So our sales engagement platform is outreach. We as part of our build out of the team and our use of the platform, we did really stick to what are their sort of recommendations as well, and it's pretty similar, right? Outbound, roughly 30 days, 15 steps, etc. Our inbound is a little bit longer, right? But like 10 days, right? Only a few more steps there, just to give people a little bit of an extra chance. But what we've seen in terms of the actual structure has been quite interesting. So we've seen great success now with building out social steps at the very beginning, right? No selling in that, right? Being as personalized as you can, or actually just offering to connect, taking a bit of a beat, right, and actually trying to immerse yourself in who this person actually is, right, and then going into call steps and then some automated steps, and then also some social selling again, back again into LinkedIn and using the power of LinkedIn in terms of voice notes, video kind of notes as well. So where we kind of see like it's mixed medium, social steps at the very beginning, and then a mixture of calls and automated steps. But in terms of number and length, it's very similar to what you've just described.
Love that. So, last segment, a little fire drill for yourself. Curious if you were to go back in time and give advice to your younger self, what advice would you give?
Excellent. Great question. So I took the advice I would give to myself is to be more curious around the systems and the processes within the commercial function. Right now, it's a little bit kind of wordy, but I'll kind of frame it in my own journey, which is I was in sales. I knew I had this itch, this interest. I gravitated towards the CRM, but I didn't go too much further, or my interest grew quite slowly in terms of the other systems that were supporting the entire commercial function. If I was going to go back, be curious, right? Be curious about how things work, the handover. The same way an SDR books a meeting, and then, the best ones really follow that meeting through, understand how the AE is going to take it to close if they want to start to grow. In the same way, having an understanding of how different systems interact, different processes interact across that commercial journey. I think that's the advice I'd give myself. And I think I would have made the leap into RevOps a lot sooner. As I said, it's an area which I absolutely love.
Well, good stuff. I'm the RevOps industry is glad to have you. And um, if folks want to connect with you, how can they find you?
LinkedIn. Just put it in. I think it's like the normal LinkedIn and Jonny Fianu. I post every Thursday just some musings on the RevOps journey. So yeah, like feel free to connect. Love sharing the journey. If I can ever help in terms of advice or ideas, or just even to bounce and riff on RevOps, don't even hesitate. I do it all the time.
Brilliant. Love it. Thanks again.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff.